Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today is Ryan Hughes. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
Ryan is CEO of Mr. Investa, buy-to-let investment experts. So looking forward to some of your answers today. Byron Crellin, CEO of Clearway Debt Squared, commercial property services experts. Welcome to you, Byron.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good to see you both down here. Thank you for making the journey, and we'll start off with you, Ryan, with your first question. If during a mid-tenancy inspection, I find the tenants are, in my view, not keeping the flat in good order, but simply tell me, don't worry, if there's a problem, take it from our deposit at the end of the tenancy, what powers have I got to insist that matters are rectified without waiting? And I can see that one cropping up a lot, actually.
It used to be one of the biggest things that we used to deal with when we used to have a large student portfolio.
Imagine, yeah.
Weekend damages. It all depends on the tenancy that they're on. And it's very, very important with every tenancy that you have the clause in there that during inspections, anything that is picked up is paid for prior to the tenancy ending. Because as with a lot of them, it gets to the end of the tenancy and the deposit nowhere near covers the damage of the properties. We used to have 7, 8, 9, even 10 bed HMOs. There'd be 15, 20 grand's worth of damage at the end if you left it. You couldn't afford to. It depends on the tenancy that you've got. It depends on the inspections. It's very important, depending on the length of the tenancy, usually a 12-month AST, that you have your 6-week or maybe 8-week inspection, and then your quarterly inspection, that you get them in there, and that you do have a clause in there that as them inspections and it's reported back to the landlord and the tenant, that damages are paid for after report of the inspection.
Okay, well that's all very well, Ron. I've seen a lot of leases over the years, and many of them will say that they're entitled to run sort of mid-tenancy inspections and things, but very rarely does it go on to say the consequences of that will be. You know, they're not sort of all-encompassing in terms of sorting out. And I'm just thinking, for instance, if you go in and there is damage, again, the person says, well, you know, you've got my deposit or whatever else. I don't know who arbitrates at that point, because by the time you get around to usual forms of arbitration, probably the tenancy's over.
Yeah, usually, obviously, any claim now, like the TDS, the Tenant Deposit Protection Scheme, you would make a claim towards them, but that would be for the deposit amount. The deposit amount should usually go towards a rental, which is usually why it's 4 or 6 weeks worth of rent. If someone misses a rent, and it's very common to someone say, oh, well, you've got my deposit, I won't pay my last month's rent. But it doesn't work like that.
But that's, over the years, I've seen very many leases, and whilst a lot of them will have the mid-term tenancy inspection specified as a requirement, very often they don't say what the consequences of that are going to be, and who is in fact is going to adjudicate on anything that's brought up prior to the end of the tenancy. And I can quite see that the argument could go on for weeks and months about whether it's justified or not, and then you're at the end of the tenancy anyway, aren't you? So
yeah, I think it's very important that when you're starting off on that tenancy journey, what is the initial AST time? I would always recommend a 6 month before giving anyone a 12-month to see how they perform in the first 6 months, and then offering a 12-month contract on the back of that. And then you've got time for your first initial 4 to 6 week inspection and 2 inspections during that time. If you're doing an inspection, it's to look for damages or how someone's behaving within that property. That is when people should be paying for the damages. And if there is damages during that point, you're cancelling the tenancy.
yeah.
What point does a guarantor come into this?
If they've required one for signing up for the tenancy. Some people don't need it because they've got it off their own credit.
I think, again, that's a point that a lot of people often don't appreciate. A guarantor is going to be on the line for the terms of the tenancy, not just the rent.
We see it on the commercial side a lot.
We had an experience where we'd actually had this during an inspection, and we had 2 houses next door to each other. They were 7-bed HMOs. We had the rugby team in there, and they'd completely trashed it within the first couple of months. We'd sent a bill. They obviously refused to pay. We went to the guarantors, obviously the parents in this case, and the parents kicking and screaming. I said, meet me at the property. They went into the property. I'm really sorry, wrote us a check.
Nice.
You know, it's people don't appreciate what a private landlord does until you show them. Some of them are actually can't believe how disrespectful people can be, because you wouldn't do that in your parents' home or your own property that you lived in. And that's why it's so important that you do penalise people.
Well, I think it does come down to this perception that, you know, landlords are sort of rich creatures that can handle and absorb anything that goes wrong. And quite often, the margins, I mean, I'm sure, you know, I don't want to knock the idea of investing in buy-to-let, but sometimes the margins can be pretty tight, can't they?
They're very tight, and some people can be accidental landlords, which is one of the most common forms. They've inherited it, which is probably one of the second. And then with the way that the rates are increasing, some of the margins aren't even there anymore, and they're having to put to. But I do believe that the capital appreciation, albeit invisible, is the only thing that is beating the current inflation.
It's hopefully saving the day, isn't it?
Yeah. But you're only going to see that on exit or refinance.
Yeah.
I'd also, Stephen, just on we've had experience of this where we've had clients with residential stock, and they said the tenant's now moved out, we've got a balance outstanding, and we've gone straight. First of all, have you got a PG? And they said, yeah. Well, let's focus on the PG. And in one scenario, the PG had moved property, didn't disclose to the landlord, and we said, your PG's out the UK, somewhere in Spain, sitting on a beach. And they were like, well, what's our options? And we said, well, we can now try and trace your former tenant, but you know, what assets have they got? None. So I think, you know, the lesson for me on just, and again, residential stock, small element of experience where we touch on it. So if you do get on the road of a PG, maybe every 6 months or every year, just make sure that your file's up to date.
Yeah, I would highly recommend. That's great advice. Every renewal of a tenancy, all checks have to be done. It's the same as if you speak to your bank. Can I just check your telephone number? Can I still check your address?
Yeah.
Exactly the same procedure, not just the tenant, the guarantors in the background, make sure everyone's details are up to date.
Do you find, is it just where there are rent insurance policies in place that people are having to provide guarantors, or is it quite widespread these days?
I think with the current rents the way they are, it's more common now for guarantors than it ever has been. From a residential, student is always quite common because of the lack of income. And they usually obviously pay that from the student loans, but the parents usually back it to get them the accommodation. But now in the residential market, now more than ever, where people are looking at the criteria and looking at the annual salaries compared to the rent and going, there's not much in this.
No. Right. There you are once again, Byron. Isn't it wonderful to be in the commercial world? Okay. Byron, your question. Do the panel think that, particularly in the world of commercial real estate, the cost of living crisis and or recession is hitting harder in the north of England as opposed to the south? From what I see, certainly it seems that retail occupation of premises in the south has improved dramatically since the days of COVID, but obviously office and factory occupation is not so easily visible. What? I'm sure you've got the actual data on this, haven't you?
Yeah, we quarterly collect data in nothing more to sort of just understand our own expectations of what our clients are going through and what they're going to give us. And what their requirements are. I think, yeah. So the question in terms of do we see a sort of trend post-pandemic in the UK by sector? Yeah, I think we do. But I think it's not a case of draw a line and say the south is outperforming the north. There are kind of suburbs in the northwest that are a lot stronger in retail than in the south. Shopping centres UK still hurting, and when you get big retail units go down, they're big hard spaces to fill, so they stick out. But in terms of high street, there are certain areas of the UK that are a lot poorer, but that's a mixture of a number of factors that is probably too deep to get into.
Okay.
In terms of industrial is quite buoyant. You know, we've got clients that are saying we're fully occupied. I think having 2 years of a landlord tenant being handcuffed together is actually, there's been a benefit to that, because they're now closer and talking to each other and probably more in tune with, I'm not being disrespectful to anybody out there that's not in tune with their portfolio, of course they are, but by the fact that they had their restrictions placed on them, people had to talk to each other and negotiate. Okay. So
now look, both of you are from that away.
Up north.
And what I want to ask you, just 10 or 15 seconds from each of you.
It's not a different currency.
No, I do understand that. I have been before. No, what I want to ask you is HS2, pet hate of mine. I think it's an absolute waste of money. You know, I mean, it's gone from 25 billion pounds to 150 odd billion pounds, except now they're saying it's only going to go halfway. Now they're saying it's only going to go at half the speed. And now they're saying it's only going to stop at half the places. I mean, is it going to make any difference to the north of England, this wretched thing, or not?
I don't believe so. I think we've spoke about it multiple times over the years. They just need to cut the cord, but no one wants to take the bullet for it. But someone's going to get it, because
would you just cut it?
Yeah, you've got
I
to.
would too.
You've just got to cut the cord and have done with it. But no one.
I mean,
wants...
they're talking now it not even coming into London. You know, well, or just to the outskirts. I mean, it's balmy. What do you think?
Well, my train was cancelled this morning,
Right.
so I had to get another train. So I just want a train. I don't mind.
You ever thought of buying a car? Or...
Yeah, have you seen your prices down here?
Yeah.
Trying to park a car.
Just leave it at that. Okay, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me after the break, when we'll be asking Byron and Ryan more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me are Byron Crellin and Ryan Hughes. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So Ryan, your second question. I'm rather confused as a new landlord what I can specifically restrict in terms of tenant suitability. For example, specific types of food preparation and cooking practices normal in different continents can cause more than unusual levels of kitchen hygiene and cleaning requirements. Pets, for instance, could be problematic, and limits on occupant numbers under any one agreement might be difficult. If rent payments go badly wrong, these problems are exaggerated. Any advice, please? It's a touchy subject,
yeah,
isn't it?
It's a very touchy subject, and we've seen it both in the student and residential side. We're in a fortunate position now where most rental properties have multiple applications. That's up to the individual that does the assessment on the background and how much information they get. It's great to have a lettings and management company for that. As to what you can say very little, apart from you've got a property to rent anymore. Even to the case of housing benefit and DSS, you used to be able to put a disclaimer saying, we do not take them. You're not allowed to say that anymore, which I think is completely wrong, because it should be the landlord's choice. But eating habits, religious habits, ethnicity is all a very touchy subject. It depends on the location that your buy-to-let property is. You can usually gauge the clientele that you're going to get in specific areas, and you'll know when investing, or you should have an idea of when investing into them areas, what the client's background is going to be. Again, it's very important that inspections are done, because in terms of what you can say or can't say is completely limited now. I've never seen a stricter what you can't say anymore.
Well, let me ask you then. So you're a letting agent and you get 4 or 5 applications in, your background checks come back, and you've met the tenants, you've described either their ethnicity or their circumstances to the landlord. Landlord makes a decision, but one of the tenants says, hey, or potential tenant says, hey, why haven't I got this property? How much do you have to disclose? How much are you on the line to spell out why you've made the decision you've made?
I don't believe you have to. If there's something in particular, obviously you always want to look at credit rating, guarantor, whether they're based UK or they're international, whether they're, because of obviously affordability. I think you can approach that, whether you've got a UK citizen or an international, if just for their own benefit when they're applying for the next property. I think it's always great if you can give that feedback, but I don't believe you have to disclose any. It's just someone else has been more successful, especially if you've got multiple applicants.
Yes, okay.
It's too busy to, you know, some of the rental properties now have got 20, 25 applicants. You know, you spend 15, 20 minutes going through that process and then 15, 20 minutes to 19 other people.
So when the government a few months ago started saying, oh, well, we think we're going to legislate and make it obligatory to accept pets, for instance, and I think Gove came on the television and said, well, it's not a problem. You can simply increase the deposit to cover it. Well, can you? I thought, is it 5 weeks limit on deposits?
Yeah.
So if you're at the 5 minutes, 5 months limit, what do you do?
They just need to, again, just keep the noses out. Because it's
perfect.
It's constantly changing, isn't it? Because it used to be you can charge £150, £250 for a pet deposit. Now they scrap the pet deposit. But actually, for someone like myself, as a landlord who has sensitive skin and is allergic to certain, I should be able to say whether I want that or not within my property.
And are you?
I am, yeah, I am.
No, but I meant, are you allowed to say it now? I mean,
no, I don't.
Has that legislation come in, or
not as far as I'm aware?
It just seems to me we keep getting a lot of these sound bites about new legislation coming in, no fault tenancies, pets, all this sort of thing, and yet nothing ever happens.
It's sound bites for a pat on the back, isn't it, or a gold star, and it doesn't work. Especially the private landlords. They're getting it from every single angle. Now with the EP, if they want to change the EPC to bring the condition of the properties up, then that should be good. But no one's going to be able to govern it. Other than that, the pets in certain properties, it then goes, well, what pet can you have? You know, how big can that pet be? Oh, it's only a small dog. What I class as a small dog and someone else classes as a small dog is completely different.
I've seen it in blocks down here. People come and say, look, can I take my dog? It's only this big. Then, of course, the next one comes in and says, well, it's only that big.
Yeah.
You know, where do you stop?
It's not that. You can have, you know, two or three pets in a block of 200 apartments, and it's the occupancy of the development that can be massively affected. I've known it on a top floor, maybe 20 floors high, and there's been 2 or 3 people with pets on that floor, and the rest of the people, top floor, premium, great views, no one wants to live there. You know, you can't control it.
No. Well, there's a block down here that suddenly allowed pets because they thought it was going to be the trendy thing to do, and the management team there keep telling me it's the worst thing they ever did. There's dogs tied to door handles and barking at passers-by and all sorts.
There's people now putting pet wash facilities and doggy spas. It's great if that's purely that building, but you could be talking about something that has 300 apartments. You're talking about a small minority. If that was my investment, I'd be on the side of caution of going, it's very difficult. It's not putting a gym or a cinema in there.
No. As you're saying, people suffer allergic reactions to things. It's very difficult.
The damage that I've seen that pets can cause, and it's not their property.
What do you think, Byron?
I deal with security dogs.
And on top,
Attack.
I was going to say, and on top of that, you got a taser.
Stephen, please.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Ryan. Byron, your question. I own a small property with a residential flat above and a small shop unit below, both of which are rented out to the same tenant, i.e. the shopkeeper is living upstairs. The tenant has now fallen into arrears with both rents, which are due under different leases. I understand the process of taking legal action or actions might be complicated, as there are effectively two leases, one commercial and one residential. Can the experts please advise on the most effective course of action open to me?
It's good news that it's two leases, because pre-2014 it was one lease, and if it was a commercial lease, we would repossess the property on behalf of the landlord for a breach of the lease, which doesn't matter what the breach is, as long as they can affect it. And that would get us the property back 100%, upstairs, downstairs, as a vacant. Post-2014 legislation, you needed to, we saw a lot of activity in the sector for this, where we had clients that had that kind of stock, where they had to separate the residential to the commercial and build purely for commercial. So rent in the commercial sense, 2014, is pure rent. So it's not service charge, it's pure rent. The residential aspect, it's a completely separate lease, separate legal agreement. So in terms of the question, did they say which one's in arrears?
Both.
Both. So in terms of the commercial, you have the option to enforce, so use enforcement agents, bailiffs, to send a 7-day notice and then attend the property if they don't correct.
No court action?
You don't need court action on commercial property, the commercial rent. And that's the only piece of legislation in England and Wales today, not Scotland, because they have strange rules. Sorry, irritation of lease, what's that? But in terms of commercial property, England and Wales, if they're in arrears, you don't need to go to court. You can instruct us today, and literally we start the process today, which is great for commercial landlords. It means reducing your debtor days, etc. We can also repossess the property, and again, we don't need to go through the court process. So that's an immediate action. In terms of the residential, I'll hand you over to Ryan here, who will go. We don't repossess residential stock.
Well, just hold on before you,
My assistant.
before you ditch your question. So what would happen? So you start to take possession proceedings, or well, just possession actions on the downstairs shop, and I'm sat up in the flat above, owing residential rent, and I say to you, I want a court order to stop you, because if you mess my shop up, right, you've got absolutely no chance of me being able to pay the residential rent.
You might think like that, and you might want to say that. In fact, you might say that as a rant, but the law is the law. Step aside, Stephen.
Well, no, I think I say, come on, you, let's go and tell it to a judge and see what he's got to say.
But the thing is, you can make an application to the judge. But what your argument and what your application is that you're asking the judge to set our warrant aside.
I suppose
and the judge will say, on what grounds? Have you paid your rent?
Okay.
Case dismissed.
He'd be worse than me in court, wouldn't he?
It's tough on the residential, isn't it, on eviction, because post-pandemic.
It's attack the landlord and power's taken away, isn't it? Yeah. It's very, very difficult. Tenants, as much as sometimes they think they've got it very difficult, they actually, the power that they actually hold is very, very dangerous, especially when you come into these sort of situations. That is where it's very important about the relationship that you have with your tenant. And keeping in regular contact for any change of circumstance. I think that, for me, is the most important rule, whether it's you or through a third party, that someone is in regular contact with them. Clear indication, is rent being paid on the time? First of all, is it set up by a direct debit, or is it when they get money in? So when they get money in, oh, well, it should be due on the 1st, but I pay it on the 2nd, or I pay it on the 3rd, and then all of a sudden it's the 5th and the 6th. You can see the pattern evolving, and that's something that you need to get onto straight away. I know the first thing should be first rent payment is made, but then a direct debit is set up. It's about getting it very early because we don't have the benefits of like a commercial lease of 7 days we're taking it back. So it's important that you're on to any change of a couple of days late or it's not on a direct debit.
It shows a pattern, doesn't it?
It shows a pattern, and don't get me wrong, some people, oh, I forgot to pay it, I'll pay it tomorrow, but you've got to push for that direct debit because most people will sign you up there and then in the office, but if you're a private landlord managing it yourself, you can sometimes be a bit more slack with the paperwork in terms of the direct debit form because you go, oh, they're paying the rent, they've got the details, we'll see you on this date. But it's about catching it early because the earlier you can catch it, the less you can minimise the damage.
I think also, and I totally echo all of that. I think the other thing as well is our viewer question here is that the tenant is the same, and in the commercial property they're in arrears, which means their business is in financial distress, which means that they're not probably getting themselves a wage, which means they can't pay the rent upstairs for the residential accommodation. So downstairs is a knock-on effect to upstairs. What they don't say is whether they've got a personal guarantor that they can go to, but you need to crystallise the situation quickly, otherwise it's a runaway.
Agreed. Anyway, on that legal note, that's the end of the show. So to Ryan Hughes, CEO of Mr. Investa, and Byron Crellin, CEO of Clearway Debt Squared, thank you both very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Stephen. Great
answers to the questions. I'm Stephen Galpin. I shall look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.